Hello, everyone. I'm Dr. Heidi Oja. I'm the founder of Aware Health, and I wanted to introduce two others on this short little video. Jamie is SVP of Growth for Aware Health, and we have Lou Bernardi, who's a founder at BrightPath. And Lou, I hear that you've kind of coined the term "boo" because you're a benefit optimization officer. And I wanted to just briefly interview you because you just received a Rosie Award for your work with your Oradell account. And I wanted to understand a little bit more about that process of, I think a lot of advisors want to wave a magic wand and see change happen, but I'm sure it's a lot harder than that. So maybe you can tell us a little bit about that.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for the introduction and the invite to talk today. So yeah, no, it is hard. I mean, this is my 32nd year in benefits. I got involved in the early 90s before managed care. When I started selling insurance, there weren't networks. None of the carriers of today even existed. So if you could imagine going, 30 years in a field that's pretty complicated, right? A managed care really overcomplicated everything, both on the insurance side and the health care side. The hospital side. So much has changed right under our noses, and I think it's deliberately complicated to make sure that the consumers in the dark and even benefit advisors. I was an expert. I was actually a general agent for the first 25 years of my career. So I was the person helping other brokers. I was the broker behind the brokers, helping them sell mostly group health insurance. And with that usually comes all the other ancillary benefits. But in 2015, 2016, kind of in the wake of the Affordable Care Act, I started really asking questions I hadn't really thought about before. I was so busy just selling insurance, and I would have introduced myself as an insurance salesperson, that long ago. And but I started wondering why none of the rules of economics or finance apply to this industry. It doesn't make any sense to me how insurance carriers, as large as they are and profitable as they are, aren't having more success managing the cost, like the claim spend. Why is it just such a given, like death and taxes, that insurance premiums have to go up every year? So I started asking a lot of questions. I started asking the brokers I was working with a lot of questions, and they didn't seem as interested in it as I did. So I lost a little bit of faith in the whole system, and I decided to give up the GA part of my career. I had already had my agency. My dad and I started what's now BrightPath in '97, just because we were getting leads and stuff. And as soon as I gave up the GA part of my career, I had a lot more time on my hands and dove even deeper into it. And I came across a bunch of organizations. One of them that I'm part of today is called Health Rosetta. A lot of other advisors and clinicians and solution partners are there. And I kind of felt at home because I wasn't the only one having these thoughts and concerns, and really concerned about, where do we go from here? $25,000 a year family premiums that are pretty lousy benefits today. And on a side note, the reason why I'm now boo is I wanted to change the mindset. I needed to identify myself differently. And I thought about how companies use outsourced CFOs a lot of times. And I came across some articles in HR Guide magazine or something like that. And it talked about the role of benefit optimization. And I read it and I said, companies can't do this. HR directors are the busiest people at every company. They don't have the time to go down the rabbit hole that I've gone down the last 6 or 7 years to really start to understand what's happening behind the scenes and why there's nothing we can do to control the current trajectory of cost and quality of benefits if you partner with the same company. So yeah, I changed my title to benefit optimization officer, and then people started calling me Boo. I'm like, why are you calling me Boo? And didn't realize that was the acronym. So I actually have Boo shirts and everything made up and everything now. But it's been great for me. And then Oradell, you mentioned the Rosie Award that we got from Health Rosetta. Health Rosetta now I think is maybe about 250 advisors throughout the country. Like myself, I got involved, I think, early 2019. And it is, I think, the most complicated part of what we do is all the vetting we have to do to find the right partners, because essentially what we're suggesting to companies that are plan sponsors is you need to leave your insurance carrier because you have no control of any of what's happening in the background, all the partnerships. Most people, I did a video a few months ago, and like, insurance is like a present. It feels like a present, right? It's a gift. You don't have to think about anything. It's what's inside there. It's all the waste that's inside that box. When you actually open it up, you realize you're not actually purchasing insurance. You're purchasing healthcare for your employees. You're financing it with insurance. And I always use the same analogy of, you're not buying a mortgage. You're shopping for a home and you're financing it with a mortgage. There's different types of mortgages. You're not acquiring college debt. You're finding a school and then you're finding a way to pay for it, right? So employers, what I try to do is I try to get them to think about, you're not buying insurance. That's what you've been taught to do and groomed to do, and not ask any questions because you don't get to see anything. But Oradell's been great to work with because they actually deserve all the credit for what's happened there. Because, I could do all the research that I want to do and talk to plan sponsors, but they have to actually be the brave ones to say, that makes sense to us.
Yeah.
What's happening now isn't working for us, and this is worth the change. So I'll stop there.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really interesting point, because you could have the best solution as opposed to this insurance option that they have. But unless you're the decision maker of your account wants to go for it, then there's really, your hands are tied, right? So how do you recommend working through that? Is it the advisor that brings it to them that helps them be more forward thinking, or is it the decision maker that eventually just over time changes their mind? Or what do you think?
We have to be like the catalyst for the change, but every company has to accept the reality of where they are. They have to evaluate where that's taking them, and decide. There's no question in my mind with all the heightened transparency, which really hasn't gotten to the consumer all that much. Like we live in a much more transparent world of healthcare and insurance, but the consumer doesn't know it because the regulations, like, it's not like they get a postcard from the Department of Labor saying, hey, here's a new law. They expect their insurance partner and their broker to share all these new regulations with them. And I could tell you, brokers don't want more work to do either, right? So they don't feel it's their role. This is compliance. So it's a real slow process. I kind of think of myself as that change director. And I want to help educate, because I think the more informed the consumer becomes, the more it's going to make sense, right? You can't see things through the dust storm, and it has to settle. I think there's advisors in the Health Rosetta community, and definitely there's other organizations too out there, and great agencies, I'm sure. The part of the country that you're in really dictates a lot of it too, because the economy in certain parts of the country is much worse than New York. You have parts of this country where the economy hasn't grown in the last 10 years. They're going out of business if they don't do something. Like, they're at the mercy of a single hospital system where you either take it or leave it. Here in New York, I don't think anybody would agree the economy's not good, but it doesn't seem to be at that pain point yet where people are being directed by the C-suite that we have to do something, right?
Yeah.
They overlook this expense like it's not even there. Like, it's just a given. I mentioned before death and taxes. I really think that's the way companies look at it, because the financial minds of the business they stepped away from this 10, 15 years ago. They stopped coming to the meetings because there was no data. So it wasn't worth their time. And that was really one of the, I think really one of the worst things that happened with benefits is that all they do is budget 5, 8, 10%. That's what they get. That's what HR waits for, is the CEO or COO or CFO waits for that number. Then the renewal comes in. You get as close to that number as you can, and then you make up the difference with plan changes or contribution changes, right? And that's the game that everybody's aware of. And because that's the way it happens for 90% of the businesses, that's just the reality that they're in. And that's taken us from, you know, I came across a file the other day that's like almost 30 years old in my office with single premiums of $25 when I started. Families were like $100, $200. It was age banded and all those things. A lot of things changed here in New York, and I'm sure other states too. But copays were $2, $5, 100% hospitalization. There wasn't even a drug benefit. It was just part of your medical plan. There wasn't a pharmacy benefit. But that $2 or $5 copay is now a $15,000 deductible. And the premiums have gone up 1,000%. Could you imagine where we would be if we still had those $5 copays? Like we'd be paying $50,000 a year for a family premium.
So last question, and then maybe Jamie can step in. I want to know, so how did you do it differently at Oradell?
Yeah, so with Oradell, it was a process of a few years. My dad is the lead. He's had a relationship with them for a really long time. That's important. There's got to be a lot of trust. And I was digging deeper and finding about all of the different components. So, you have your TPA. Oradell was with a national carrier. They were self-insured already, and it was a disaster. They were over 100% of their aggregate. They had a laser of $450,000, then $150,000 specific on one member who always exceeded that laser. So they were, they were out of control, their spend. And I was interviewing TPAs, I was interviewing PBMs, hundreds of both of those, and then starting to, because I was part of the Health Rosetta, other vendors, MSK vendors like yourselves, mental health vendors, specialty medication vendors, diabetes medication or specialists. There's so many subsets. And what's important for the consumer to understand is this is in your plan now. When you buy insurance from your insurance carrier, they have 30 or 40 or 50 or could be hundreds of third-party relationships with companies that are doing pre-cert this and pre-cert for that. And, it's just on one ID card. So when you dissect it and you realize all we're doing is we're taking what they have now, we're finding the best-in-class solution partners that are more transparent as we can get, which is a weird word because, there's still things that aren't transparent regardless, but you always have to keep evaluating it. And then plugging in a lot of those other, I would say, next level solutions that you don't know if you need necessarily, right? You just want to, we were talking just before the call about data, and that's really the key. Making the change in TPA gave Oradell the freedom to select the partners that were going to work in their best interest, right? A PBM, a specialty medication provider, a company that's dedicated to dialysis. We didn't have anybody on dialysis, but we plugged it in because we understood that if it should happen 3 months from now, 6 months from now, we have something ready to go already, right? And there's no cost to it unless you actually use it. So it's really the vetting process that was a little overwhelming. That's where the value of something like Health Rosetta helped me, because I can talk to other advisors. I could pick up the phone now and just introduce myself as another Health Rosetta advisor. And I could say, in the portal, I see you've used this solution. We're evaluating them. What do they like? What do they like to work with? What's their responsive? Do they actually do what they claim to be able to do? Because it sounds great, but we're not looking to throw the kitchen
It's
sink.
risky introducing a solution without doing that research ahead of time.
Yes.
So yeah, that makes sense.
I think the next evolution that we've gotten to, and other advisors certainly that I follow, because I'm learning from people all the time too, is that we actually now, once we've done it and we find the right combination of TPA, PBM, and solution partners, they're working together already. We've created a health plan now, so we call them Right Path health plans. So now it's like we have 3 or 4 different choices. It depends on the stop loss, the size of the group, maybe where they're located, the type of, are we still using a carrier, or do they want to consider reference-based pricing? All of those things kind of dictate who the best solution bundle would be. So it's already been bundled. That was a scary thing, and I'm sure it's scary to a lot of other advisors out there, is trying to get all these entities that have never worked together to work together. And will it work? And if it doesn't work, it's disruptive. And I think, a lot of people call Health Rosetta, Dave Chase, who's, one of the main people at Health Rosetta, disruptors. I don't like that word. I don't think Dave does either, but because then it sounds disruptive. Right? It's not, it has to be not disruptive. We're disrupting the system, right? But we're not disrupting the client or their members. I could tell you that if Oradell was on this call right now, they would tell you they didn't have to do anything more. There was nothing more for them to do. The switch was easy. It was intimidating to get there, but once they got to the point, there was no turning back. And immediately they realized the difference. They actually called my dad and said, something's wrong. Like, what? What's wrong? Well, our pharmacy costs were only this, and it was half of what it used to be. So he's like, oh, okay, all right, let me check. We called up the PBM. It's like, no, that's the difference in the cost. They've reduced their pharmacy spend alone by 50%. That wasn't even including the $60,000 in rebates. So it can be really impactful very quickly.
Yeah.
It's a challenge. I'd say don't go it alone. Be part of an organization like Health Rosetta, where you can learn and really speed up the evolution of what you're trying to do with support of all the other members.
I think the point that you made about teamwork is so important. It's like, how can we all work together, whether it's nurse navigation, the TPA, different solutions that are, being introduced, and because we all have the same goals of engagement and driving down costs. So how can we all work together to be able to do that? Thank you so much for your insights and sharing your experience. And, I think I would love to do another session with you just to understand how you handle the stress of knowing what's right for your customers sometimes, and then them not actually acting or going for it
Right.
for a while. And so it takes an incredible amount of patience and hard work to
It
redesign
does.
a plan. But thank you so much for your time.
You're welcome. Thank you. Happy to jump on anytime.
Okay.
Have a great holiday season, guys. Thank you.